this is actually a presentation I've done a few times, but I know it's actually I know it's a valuable presentation because people say that it's a valuable presentation, and not only that, I know that the stuff that I will be talking about today are things that people are not doing very well when they're using Azure. And these are baseline fundamental skills that everybody should have when they're using Azure. So let's get going. Now, if you run applications in Azure, it's kind of the same, but it's also kind of different. And what I see is that people just go to Azure and they start using stuff. They use the Azure portal and they create things, websites, storage accounts, databases, and they manage stuff the way they can. And that works, but it's not optimal. And after years and years and years, companies are still doing it the same way they did it the first time, because it's not in their business model to have someone who actually goes out and figures out all the latest things. And that's kind of where I come in, to be the guy that can come in and say, hey, I know a few things that you might want to know about, which is going to make your life more optimal. And basically that's what this talk is about. So I'd like to start to talk about you, or ask you. I know it's a little bit scary. We're Swedes. We don't actually raise our hands when people ask questions, you know. It's a little weird. But let's try it anyway. Who here has something deployed in Azure in production? That's a lot of people. That's like half, almost half, I would say, 40%, 40–50%. That's cool. And regardless if you do or don't, actually a few years ago I'd asked the question if people have Azure accounts, but now I assume that everybody do. So it's actually proven to be true in many cases that, yeah, we all have Azure accounts now, but not everybody has anything in production. Regardless if you just looking at Azure or just played with it, or if you do have stuff in Azure, let me ask you this. Have you ever executed and deployed with an ARM template? That's 5 people. So several have done it, but most have not. And in all honesty, you should probably all do it that way. And that's what this presentation is about. I have been introduced as Magnus Mårtensson. That is correct. I'm an Azure MVP. I was the first person to be an Azure MVP in the Nordic countries. Maybe that's not a huge achievement, but it means that I've been around Azure since I was pretty much a baby, and I've seen all the growing pains of Azure and stuff. So I was there before this resource template model kind of thing that we're going to talk about today actually existed. And I know that a lot of companies were in Azure back then, and they're still not using the new stuff, which is now not really new. I'm also regional director, and that's kind of a funky title because I don't have a region. I don't work for Microsoft, and I don't direct anything. But so I run my own company, Loftysoft. I mean, it says right there, Loftysoft. That's my company. I'm a consultant. I help companies get on Azure. I consult people to get into Azure in the most efficient way and how to optimize their usage of Azure. But being a regional director means that I'm very, very close to Microsoft. It's actually I think it's like the topmost title that you can have outside of Microsoft, which means that I talk to vice presidents of Microsoft frequently, which is really fun. So if you have any questions, any thoughts, any feedback at all, feel free to send me an email or hit me up on Twitter or something, and I will try to help, because that's my job. I'm a consultant. Also, I was going to mention this. We talked about it before we started. The Global Azure Bootcamp. Will we have a Global Azure Bootcamp location in Skåne? It'll be here? Awesome. Sounds good. So the Global Azure Bootcamp is lots of events, all on the same day. And I kind of have to, it's recorded and everything, right? So I kind of have to mention it. Last year, there were like 250 locations worldwide, and it starts up over here in Australia time zones, all the way to the east in the morning there, and they run their event for the day. Whatever agenda, whatever content, sessions, workshops, whatever they want to do, and it continues across all the time zone, all of them, all the way over to actually Hawaii. So the end-to-end duration of the event is something around closing almost 30 hours. And there's over 10,000 attendees at this thing. The thing we share is the date and the hashtag, and we get some global sponsors to give out software licenses and stuff like that. So it's a huge event. On this day, we dwarf Microsoft with all of their social media assets. I think we have 5 or 10 times more coverage of the world on social media than Microsoft have on that day. So they're pretty blown about it. It's like, what the heck is this? But yeah, it's cool. You should all sign up and come to the event. We're going to see if we can line up some speakers or workshops and things on that day. It's going to be April 21st. All right, this is the reason we are here. And it's kind of a weird reason, so I'm not going to be too roundabout with it. Azure, the cloud, or any cloud, but cloud in general is now something which concerns everybody, quote unquote. We used to be over here with the early adopters, and a few people were doing it, but most large companies were like, yeah, we'll wait a while. It doesn't seem urgent enough. But now it's urgent for everyone. Everyone is doing Azure now. And this piece here in the middle, that's where all technology wants to go. This is the majority section of the market, like 80% of the market. When the majority section of the market needs some technology, wants it, that's when we know that it's jumped this gap here. This gap is called the chasm of doom. That's where bad technology falls down to die. Like anybody here has been in the industry long enough to remember WAP? Terrible technology, right? It sucked. It was really bad. And it fell into the abyss and died, right? Quite appropriately. So cloud didn't die. Cloud is thriving and growing a lot all the time. I know. I've been here since, maybe not since there, but certainly since this time I was there. And I know that a little while ago it kind of whoosh, started to just rise, and more people showed an interest about the cloud. That's why we are here. Because now a lot of, compared to the number of new companies using Azure per month over here to this, there's lots of companies that want to use Azure in a good way. I'm going to say Azure. I could say cloud, but I'm going to say Azure. Makes it easier. They don't know how to use Azure. They don't know what to do about it. And that's why I run my own consultancy to help people. So good for me, I guess. So maybe some 10 years ago now, Microsoft created this cloud platform. In the beginning, there were like 4, 5 services or something. The original presentation. Here's Windows Azure, it was called. It wasn't even called Microsoft Azure. They had to change that because otherwise a Linux machine in Azure would be called a Windows Azure Linux machine. It would be really confusing. So they had to change it to Microsoft Azure. But now, this is just a picture. And here's a hint. Whenever anybody shows you a picture like this, I don't mean to have a quiz later and ask you what all these things. It's not for you to remember. It's for you to realize that, yeah, there's a lot. And there's a lot more. You can run a command and see how many resource providers there are available in Azure. And it's like over 100 at this point. So many different types of resources that you can use. And this is confusing and obviously overwhelming. We're not going to talk about building applications and stuff, but you can start really easy by deploying a web application. Let me see here. Using a database, normal database, and maybe some storage. So it doesn't have to be complex. But there's so much potential here, and after a while when you start using these things, you kind of need to manage them in a good way. And how do you do that? What are some challenges about that? Well, you need to know who has access to the resources, who can log into the database. How do I deploy my web applications over and over again? How do I know if they are performing the way they should? All these things. And at the end of the month, how do I know how much that costs? I know a lot of companies that don't really know what Azure costs in detail. They just pay the invoice. It's like, yeah, it's something. It costs something. I know a lot of companies that have MSDN subscriptions. Well, the artist formerly known as an MSDN subscription, now called a Dev Essentials, right? How many people have Dev Essentials, right? You have licenses with Microsoft and you can use their software. Well, that actually is reasonable sum of money that you pay every month, and that includes some usage of Azure. A lot of companies don't use those resources because it seems a little bit messy. How do we share them among our developers? And it's just complicated. So instead of using the stuff they're already paid for, they pay for even more Azure by using development and test environments on a paid account, which is ludicrous. What I'm talking about now can actually help with that. So it helps you see how much you're spending. So it seems kind of important. And also this. We want to be agile, right? We want to deploy things in an agile and awesome way. And we want to do it over and over and over again. On every build, we want to deploy stuff. I've seen people who who do like this. They push their code to, say, Visual Studio Team Services. Could be GitHub, but let's say VSTS. Automatically, this code is built, unit tests are running, and everything seems to be working fine. And then I've actually seen people that take this several steps further. They run an ARM template. I haven't even showed you an ARM template, but they run a template which provisions some resources in Azure. They run an automated deployment to that environment, and they run some web tests on this environment, collects all the data, and sees that everything is okay. This is now a buildable, testable, deployable, and actually runnable thing. And then after they're done with that, they actually run a second resource template to remove the resources from Azure. And what did that achieve? Well, it achieved full automation end-to-end, but it achieved something else. The deployment of resources into Azure was only running for the duration of the tests. So the test environment is incredibly optimized at that point, which is costing nearly nothing. It's deployed for minutes or an hour or something, depending on how long these tests take to run. So it's pretty cool that you can do these things, but how do I know that when I deploy stuff, I get the same things over and over again? Well, then you have to automate, and that is done through templates. So Microsoft came up with this resource manager model thing. And actually before that, before they had the ARM model, they had an SASM model, Azure Service Management, before Azure Resource Management. And the old model had some drawbacks, which they addressed when they changed the model completely. That's also when they changed between the thing which is currently the portal, right? Portal.azure.com, and the previous version of the portal, managed windowsazure.com. The old blue portal, and then we have the new fancy-pantsy portal. That's the difference in between. There is also the underlying mechanism upon which this builds. Because the old blue portal was not a model where you could manage several resources at once. It was not a model which scaled very well. So it was difficult to add new resources. They called them services back then, right? And then they changed the name and called it resources. So now anyone can add resources to the platform. And it goes like this. If you want to provide a service to Azure, it could be websites, could be SQL databases. Now all of these are Microsoft examples, but if you run that command, it's actually you can run it as a PowerShell commandlet, probably in the CLI as well. If you run a command and list all the resource providers, several of these, quite a few of them, like 30, 40, I don't know, are not from Microsoft. Could be ClearDB databases, could be SendGrid email, bunch of things like that. Other companies are providing resources for people to use in Azure. So they run their resources and they make them available to you to subscribe to, the same way you subscribe to a SQL database from Microsoft. So this model needed to have this resource provider so that you can add however many of these you want, however many resources that you create in the future. So they all need to implement this provider contract. And from the other end, from the top layer there, you will start using some tools to interact with this. And regardless of which tools you use, there are multiple, we'll talk about them, you will all interact with the Azure Resource Management endpoint. So it's a RESTful API. It's management.azure.com/some stuff. That's where you have your resources, and you can actually make HTTP requests and call that thing direct if you want to. It's completely possible to do, but you'd probably rather use some tools like PowerShell or the Azure portal. Doesn't matter which one it is. They all talk to this REST API. So that's how it works. That's the model that they built. Nothing kind of specifically innovative there, but it's just a good explanation to say how does this thing actually work. So with the Resource Manager, we've talked about you can deploy resources to Azure. I want to have 10 databases. Okay, good. I want to have 100 storage accounts. No problem. So that's what you do. You deploy resources, and then you can organize them into groups. We'll talk more about that, how you effectively organize your resources. And then you can control who gets access to these resources. Because along with the Azure Resource Management model, also at the same time came the role-based access control. So the middle one there, organized resources, has to do with resource groups. So however, many of you know exactly what a resource group is. Most of you do, no, maybe half again. A resource group is a bucket. So in Azure, you cannot deploy anything at all unless you put it in a bucket. You want to have a database, it needs to go in a bucket. And every resource that you deploy, provision in Azure, always goes in just one bucket. Fun thing about them is that they have to have a location, the empty buckets. You say, I want to have a bucket in Western Europe, I want to have a resource group in Western Europe, or I want to have a resource group in Australia. But the resources that you put inside doesn't actually have to be in the same region. It's a little bit of a mind bender right there, but imagine scenarios that you have to have this metadata, the information about your resource group somewhere, and that's why you give it a location. So you assign it to a data center, a region, right? But when it comes to the resources, let's say that you have a scenario where you want to have web applications around the world. Maybe you have one resource group for all your web applications, but have one in the US, one in Europe, one in Asia, one in Australia maybe one in South America, Africa. And all of these web applications, these deployments will have different locations, but they can be in the same bucket. So it's just a grouping thing, a grouping mechanism. And it helps you with access control and these things as well. So it's kind of handy anyway. Sure. Yes. The region you select for a resource group has absolutely zero impact on your application. None at all. In terms of how it runs. Because if you have, let's say you choose a region. Let's choose Western Europe. And there is a problem in Western Europe. You can't access Western Europe. Let's say that happens. It doesn't happen often, but hey, let's imagine. If you have a database which is in that resource group, but it's in China, that database is still working fine. There's nothing ties, there's no tie there. Nothing ties it to it. But in terms of management, that's a different story. You may have issues with accessing management for these things. How do you know if you have access to it if you can't check if you have access to the resource group? But the resources have no other connection. It's an organizational construct. So, I've been talking for a while. Let's have a look at the simplest possible template that you could have. It's this. It's an empty template, so it doesn't specify any resources at all. But I wanted to show you that these are the top-level constructs of a template. It's a string of JSON, right? It's a blob of JSON. That's what a template is. It describes your resources. So you can have resources, a whole array of them. You can have some sort of parameter input there, and you can have some sort of output, and you can also declare your variables. That's it. That's all you can do in a template. So it doesn't have to be complicated. Now, before I go any further, I have seen complicated templates. Templates can be hundreds of lines long. Templates can link to other templates. You can make this really complicated, but I urge you not to, right? This is comparable to the times where you had somebody in the office who was the IT guy who was really, really good with commandlets. He could do magical things on the command line, right? But those scripts, they were in a library at best, but probably most of them were in his head. if there were any kind of library, no one else could read those scripts because they were so complicated and complex, and only that person knew. I call that job security, but it's not super great for most companies to have that sort of knowledge tied to just one person. The idea with a resource template is that that you will be able to read a template quite easily and see what it contains. Now this is the simplest possible template that does anything that I could figure. What does this template do if I deploy this template? What does it create? Storage. A storage account. It says right there. It says it has a name. It says it's going to be in Western Europe, and it has also a type. Okay, cool. So very, very simple. It specifies, and even if you never knew anything about templates, if you read this, you kind of understand. That's the point. It's shareable, it's useful knowledge now, and it's maintainable within your organization. Now, we're going to go and deploy this guy to Azure. So here is Azure. I made a blank, nice screen there. And here are my resource groups. I think in this demo subscription, I have a few other demos lying about. But now Azure, or maybe the internet here, is a little bit sketchy. Huh. It was good before I started. Let's see if we have internet. It seems like we should have internet. No resource groups to display. That actually surprises me, since I knew there was a couple other demo resources. There we go. Now it's better. Something with the Wi-Fi, I'm sure. So there are a couple of demos there. You can ignore those. Those are other presentations. This thing, we want to deploy that to Azure. And I do that using PowerShell. And I guess I need to make that a little bit larger. Can I? I can make it larger. All right. Here we go. I am going to do two things. One, create a resource group. Two, run a deployment. So it's really simple. It starts by me saying I want to run the new Azure RM resource group script. And then actually I'm going to run first the null template, the empty template, which had 0 resources. And I'm going to run a deployment. New Azure RM resource group deployment. That's it. So those are the only 2 commandments I'm running. I'm already signed into Azure, and that stuff is already taken care of, but normally you'd have to do that too. So if I F5 this guy, it starts to run. And it says that the template that I supplied is valid, and it's been submitted to Azure, and Azure came back and said, this is a valid template. There's nothing wrong with your actual template. And then it ran the thing, and it came back with a result, and it said, we succeeded with this provisioning. Now, so what happened when I ran this empty template in Azure? Well, I did run 2 things, right? At first, I created a resource group. So that was the first commandlet. ARM for the win is my resource group. And it's empty because I ran a template which was valid, but it didn't specify any resources. So Azure just said, all right, we're done. That was easy. So now I'm going to show you my mad PowerShell skills by selecting from there. So I can now run this other template file, the other deployment. That is going to do the same thing, send my ARM template up, and Azure says that's valid. And now we're going to run this deployment for you. And that will, again, create a storage account. Done. So that means that we should be able to hit refresh. And we should, if the Wi-Fi is with us and everything works fine. If the Wi-Fi is sketchy, which I'm fearing, the client here tries to talk to the server, but nothing kind of comes back. Okay, it did complete, right? Oh, the null template completed. Maybe I didn't run it. Run selection. That may be the case. Maybe I didn't run it. Okay, I'm running it now. Yes, the template is still valid. Good. That's probably, I was surprised that it was so fast, so I probably didn't do the right thing. It's going to run for maybe, I don't know, depends. 10, 20 seconds, maybe sometimes more, but quite quickly. So what happens now is that Azure is in fact provisioning a storage account for us in Western Europe on my subscription. And it's probably going to run quite quick. And then, when that is done, we should be able to see it here. So it's already shown up. Maybe the template is not completed, but it's shown up. It's called ARM Training Magnus 42. It's the name of my storage account. And in this storage account, that could store like a terabyte of files or something like that, right? There you go. Now it's completed on this side as well. So it's succeeded and everything is good. What happens if I run this thing again? I'm running it one more time. What happens? Anyone? Any thoughts? Yes? Correct. Nothing happens. The templates are idempotent, which means that if you run them twice, nothing new happens. If I were to delete that storage account or something like that, and then run it, then it's going to recreate that storage account again. And there's one more important thing to notice, and that is the deployment mode that I'm using there. There are 2 deployment modes. And I was specific to specify the incremental deployment mode here. It's default, actually. The other option is complete. And if you deploy using complete mode, not only will Azure make sure that you have the template specified in your template, have the resources specified in your template deployed, it will also remove other resources in the same resource group that are in that resource group. So be careful about using that complete mode. Know what you're doing when you do that. But you can run incremental all day long, and nothing new will happen. But it's kind of like it's a little bit similar to desired state configuration management for resources in Azure. It's kind of similar in that context, in case you have done that kind of thing on a Windows server or similar. So this storage account is now created. So super simple first example. All right. Thanks. And these things I said, you can deploy. One thing is you can deploy a template to one resource group only, but you can deploy to many services at once. I just did one resource, one storage account, but you can do many. And I will show you using 2 later, so I won't be showing you any huge examples. I've seen templates with 40 resources. That's massive. They can be hundreds of lines long, these templates, but there's no point in me showing you a big, long, complicated template here today while we're talking about the concepts. Yeah. I was. Are there any other options to deploy a template? Wait a minute, I will tell you. Let's talk just really quickly more about resource groups, and I'm actually going to give it away here basically in the interest of time. It depends. Do I deploy all my resources in the same resource group, a web application, a virtual machine, and a storage account? That's my application. These are the things that I need for my application. Do I deploy them to just one resource group, or maybe I put them in separate resource groups? That kind of depends on how you want to manage things. If you were to, in the future, move or delete or change your web application, it's kind of likely that you want to have the same files still intact. Or maybe this is a database server. Maybe you're running Oracle or something on here in Azure. You can do that. It's probably likely that you will want to keep that database, even if you remove the web application. But it kind of gives you a hint that these things don't have the same lifespan. That might mean that you should put them in different resource groups. But it's up to you. You can have them in just one. It's fine. Just know what you're doing, right? Whatever solution works for you. But there's only one layer, right? You can't put a resource group in a resource group, and you can't put a resource in more than one resource group. So it's just one thing you can do with it, which keeps it simple. I think that's good. So let's do another type of deployment. you probably have many environments. And one really good advantage of running in Azure, even if you do test and development in Azure, it doesn't mean you have to deploy in Azure. But sometimes people do, right? They do both development and test, and then they deploy to Azure. The cool thing is that you are running now on an environment which is identical every time. You can run the same types of things for all your environments and know that they're running on the same type of system. Because usually what we used to do back in the days when we didn't have the cloud, your company would have some sort of a server farm or some sort of servers in a room somewhere. And then after a while, when these servers became sufficiently old, they'd buy new servers. So that'd be a big investment for the company. And they would take these new servers and you would roll the production environment onto these new servers, and the IT manager and the management, they would be so proud that they had upgraded to this new huge and very nice environment, which was expensive and all that. They kind of like to remind you many times how expensive that was. And then they look around, turn around and look at all those old servers and be like, huh, you know what? Those servers are still running. There's nothing really wrong with them. It's just old and slow and stupid. We give that to the developers so they can run development and test on that. Awesome, well, saving money. Not so awesome, because now you're actually running testing on an environment which is different from production, right? So not awesome. But that's how it was done. Very few companies actually invested in an equally powerful production and testing environment. That's not a common occurrence. If you had that scenario, well then lucky you. Most people did not. Problem is now, do I need a template for each of my environments? Well, the answer is no. You use the same template for all your environments. You create a parameter file. If you recall, there was something called parameters. One parameter file for each environment. So my second demo, actually my last demo, I will show you this. And I used a slightly more complicated template. It's a little bit longer because it has a few parameters. It has website name, SKU name, that's the size of a web application, SKU capacity, how many instances of my web application do I want in my server farm. And when I say server farm, I do that kind of deliberately. Here you have a resource that I'm marking there. It's a Microsoft.web/server farms resource. And I don't know, have you looked into Azure and found something called a server farm? No, you haven't. Because in Azure that's called an app service plan. So it used to be the concept of a server farm, but then, some marketing person, no, wait a minute, farms? Are we farmers? No, we're IT people. We're cool application developing professionals. We have to rename server farms into something that is more marketable. Except, well, I'm told that this is actually an untrue story, but it's kind of funny to tell it this way. Underneath the covers, it's in fact server farms we're using. Okay? That's our web application. Now, the other resource that I have is Microsoft.web/site. And also, again, if you go to Azure, you can't find any websites. You can only find the app service with web apps. So it's all about the apps. On the marketing surface of things, they're called apps. But underneath, in fact, it is a website that we are using. I guess site wasn't hip enough, right? So there you go. This, if I run a deployment using this, it will deploy for me a server farm and one instance of a web application into that. So a web application cannot run in Azure without a server farm attached to it. The server farm kind of has its, the app service plan has this notion of which capacity it has, the size of the thing, and how much it costs in these things. And in this, you can put many different websites or web apps. So it actually says here that there is a reference to a server farm, and it's actually this server farm that I'm referencing here. And it also says depends on. So this thing cannot be deployed unless that is deployed. So when I submit this template to Azure, Azure will look at the thing and figure out, well, there's a dependency here, so I guess I got to create that first and then that. So that's, you can say depends on in these things. And then I have the parameters, right? Now, I'm going to show you my script for this. Let's pull it down a little here. I created myself a little array of 3 environments there, a development and a testing and a production environment. I gave them different names and stuff. And as you can see, there are also these parameter files there at the end. I will show you these in a minute. I have a little script block here which logs into Azure, selects my subscription, selects my or creates a resource group based on the name that I'm passing in, and then runs a deployment. And then I for each that and run. Do you know that you can do a start job in PowerShell and run something in the background? It's pretty cool. You can do that. I will run this template right now. And as you can see, that started running background jobs. 3 of them are running in the background. And in fact, you can, I'm going to show you the templates, but I wanted to start this thing and get it going. You can actually run get job on this continuously to see which jobs are running in the background. And that actually frees up your console here so you can continue and do other stuff while deployments are happening. Because these deployments now will take, I don't know, half a minute or something, depending on how fast the Azure data center can actually provision your resources. So parameter files. I have 3, and I have some parameters that I'm passing in. So for my development environment, I'm using this file. It is a parameter file. It specifies parameters and some names. This is the name of an application. I give it an environment name also. So the name of the application goes into the goes into the file when I deploy. And if I look back at these parameters here, it means that I specified the name, the website name. That's good. I needed to do that. A string. The SKU name I did not need to specify, but it has a default value of F1. F1 is the free tier of web application. So this is a free web application running in my subscription. I can run like 10 of those in any Azure subscription. It cannot really take any load or anything. You can't like go to production with that or anything like that. But you can run it for making sure your deployments work. So my development environment only runs with a free tier application. Also, the third parameter there is missing. It's the number of instances. But let's go immediately to the production environment and see. Well, there I specify I want to run not on the free tier, but I want to run on the S1 tier, which is a shared 1 level instance. It's a larger instance, which can run in production if you want to. And the SKU capacity, I want to have redundancy there. I'm running 2 instances. So because I specify these things in my parameter file, and I give my deployment a parameter file, a set of parameters, I can just run that template with different parameters. So let's see if the thing is done running. It says completed, and actually there are a couple of old ones lying about when I was testing before, so we can ignore those. But it's completed, which means that we can go to Azure and refresh this page, and I have 3 more resource groups. One called dev, one called test, one called prod. So 1 template, different parameters, and if we drill into these, you'll see that yes, indeed, I have 2 instances here, I have 1 free instance there, and the test environment is like 1 basic instance, if I recall correctly. So that's how you do it. And that means that you can version, manage, and check into source control, along with your source code and stuff, also your templates for the environments that you run on. And then you can have different parameter files based on which environment you're deploying to. Now everybody should really do that because it's incredibly convenient once you start to actually do it. Now I'm going to answer your question. Tooling. Well, of course there's lots of tooling. It's Microsoft, right? And so tooling is something that they do a lot. For instance, you can use the portal. You can use the Visual Studio to interact with Azure Resource Management. I actually did it today. I was deploying a web application from the tooling inside of Visual Studio, and that uses the ARM management endpoint as well. Of course it does. There's no other way to do it. So you can do those. You can use Visual Studio Code, and there's one thing I want to mention here. When it comes to this, Visual Studio Code is the tool that probably some tech-savvy IT people will transition into using. Because it's unlikely that they will want to install Visual Studio, which is a big installation that costs a bunch of money, when all they wanted to do was run or edit maybe and manage a few templates. But there is support in Visual Studio Code for managing ARM templates, and it's okay. It's getting better, but you can do it. And in fact, you saw me do it. I'm using Visual Studio Code Insider's build, in fact, to show you templates in Visual Studio Code. But since Visual Studio Code supports Git as well, you can use source control and check your stuff in, and that means that there's a few new things for IT pros. A few things have changed, and I love to use this picture as the sort of the backdrop to the conversation that humans don't like change. As you can all see, this is of course an automobile. It's a wagon which is automatically able to be mobile on its own without a horse, and that was really scary to some people, right? They were like, "Oh my God, it's the wagon of death!" And so they sometimes put like a horse's head on the front of the carriage there to sort of cushion the blow for some people. That were like, the early designs of these things had a whip holder, because if you don't have a whip holder, where are you going to put the whip, right? Because weird. No, actually, they didn't trust these things in the beginning, so they were kind of convertible back to actually bringing a horse around when they broke down, right? But anyway, changes will happen, and in the IT industry, in the beginning, it was like, oh my God, we're not going to need the IT department anymore, and it was like, oh, of course, sorry, very sorry for the insult there. Of course, we're going to need the IT department. But the cool thing about the IT department now is that they have no limitations. Like before, you came to them and like, I'd like to, requisition a database. Well, here's a form, right? You fill out the form, and like maybe 2 to 6 weeks, we're gonna get the new RAMs and we're gonna install them on the server, and after that, we can upgrade a SQL server. And after 3 months, database is yours, no problem, right? Now in Azure, it's like click, right? It's ridiculous. You want 50 databases? No problem. So IT has all the power now, and they're like super IT. You can also use PowerShell or the Azure CLI. So the Azure CLI version 2.0 is really cool. I love it. I actually feel more at home with PowerShell. I showed you PowerShell here. I could have used Azure CLI and just write AZ and some commands, and that's cool too. Actually, it doesn't matter, because both of these are actually open source, which is also funny. Microsoft has 2 open source command line interfaces. Okay, right. You can use an SDK. So you can write an application. This is an example, again, with lots of information, but for fun, right? This is an example of using code with a Fluent API, in this case, to specify a virtual machine. So you can write an application which deploys stuff. In this case, this would create a Windows virtual machine in US East with some stuff. Yeah, I think I copy-pasted that somewhere. But anyway, you can write code that also deploys stuff. Now, I'd like to tell you the secret about Azure. Would you like to know the secret about Azure? Yay! Let's talk about the secret of Azure. Yay! Let's see if it actually works. To click here, that's interesting. Actually, maybe it's not signed into that browser. That may be. Let me go and use this one instead. So if you go to resources.azure.com, oh my gosh. So they've actually stopped supporting that browser, which is probably a good thing to do. That actually speaks to intent right there. Okay, we'll have to use Edge then. They are supporting Edge. So there we go. That was funny, actually. All right, so if you go to resources.azure.com, I forgot about that. You can drill into all of your subscriptions. And I'm going to do that real quick and see if we can find some of the resources we have deployed. I'll open up this sign-in that I'm signed in here with my credentials, has access on this directory has access to these subscriptions. I'm also accessing a bunch of different directories. But here's these Microsoft-sponsored Azure account subscription that we get as MVPs, so we can do demos. I have a few resource groups, right? My production environment, maybe. What do I have down there? I have some resources. I think this has happened to me before. It's like this thing hasn't updated itself, which is weird. We'll ignore that problem and we'll go to my corporate website instead. Never ever browse to my corporate website, by the way. It's very ugly. Huh, there's something not working here. That is weird. Let's see if I can... there we go. That's better. Maybe that was the problem. I did that down there. The other thing I did. Let me check if I did it the wrong way. Web. Okay, there we go. This takes forever. It could be that I'm not on the right subscription. I should be. Sorry for the confusion there. Let's see. Okay, there's something wrong here. It's unfortunate. Maybe I can't tell you the secret. Let me try. Hang on. I might have something here. Let's see. See if I have something here. Something random. Sites. Yes. No, please. There's something not really working here. Okay, for some reason I can't get to the resources here right now. Maybe it's something temporary. What I wanted to show, maybe here. Let's see. That's too bad. What I wanted to show here is these URLs up here. I can still show those anyway. Unfortunately, I can't show you my resources. I don't know why. Never mind. Management.azure.com is the endpoint that I work with, I talk to. You can browse to it, but you can also start to drill down into, in this case, /subscriptions. And here's a subscription identifier for a subscription. It's just a unique number. And then /resource groups, and then whatever resource group I have, the resource group name. And then it goes down into whatever resource provider I'm using, Microsoft.websites or something like that, and then /my site name. And the thing you see here is, of course, URI. It's a unique identifier for a resource. No other resource has this identifier. But it's also a URL that I can talk to. I can issue commands to that. I can say /stop. I'll stop a website. I can say /start to start a website. But I can also see here very clearly that if I have a subscription, that can have many resource groups and that can have many resources. It's quite easy to see this, like 1, 2, 3. So if I have, on the left there you saw I had like 5 subscriptions. If I have multiple subscriptions, each one of those subscriptions is kind of like a little tree. And the resource groups would be the branches of the tree. And the resources themselves, the databases, the web applications, the storage accounts, they would be the leaves. Now we're all tech people here, I assume, right? You're probably really bored by now if you're here and not a tech person. So we understand trees, right? I mean, that's simple. The subscription is a tree. The resource groups are branches and the resources are leaves. And if I have many subscriptions, I got a little forest going there, right? A forest of trees. So you all thought that Azure was a cloud? It's not. It's a forest. Okay? So now you know the secret. And the reason I tell that story, unfortunately I couldn't show it very well, the reason I take the time to tell that is that it gives a really good mental model for us to think about Azure in the future. And it's not that scary anymore, right? It's actually quite easy. And I think it's important to mention that. All right, browse there for a bunch of quick starts. There are hundreds of them. If you want to do anything in Azure, odds are that somebody already posted something very similar in there. There's several hundred resource templates there, and some of them are very complicated, like deploy a whole SharePoint server farm with one go, whack, like hundreds of lines of JSON. So you can certainly become complicated, but you can also do more simple stuff. But these are very elegant, and I love that as a really good start. Pick one of those that are similar to what you want to do. I want to deploy a Linux virtual machine. Well, go and find that template and read through it and try to understand it, and then do your own thing. Or copy it. That works too. So, we have like not very much time. All right, cool. I've been talking a lot. There's lots of things you can do with this. I will show you a few of them. Role-based access control is probably one of the most important ones, and it works something like this. In fact, let me do this. Give me a second. I'm going to jump out of presentation mode there. And I'm going to jump around a little. There we are. All right. Working? Yes. Good. So role-based access control gives you the ability to assign access to the resources. So if you're like the owner of stuff, you're like Scott Guthrie, I think, maybe, right? If you own a bunch of resources, Azure subscriptions, you can give access to contributors and sort of delegate to your, I don't know, team leaders or somebody, and or department heads, somebody, and they can give access to resource groups and create resource groups and give access to them to maybe different teams. You can clearly see, if you can see that this guy is a developer because he has a black t-shirt that says 404, so he's probably a hipster. He should have a beard. But anyway, the point here is that you can give access to just a single database. Let's say you have a DBA. The DBA shouldn't be touching the web application or shouldn't be able to accidentally do anything with the web application. So you can grant access to just the database. Or to a whole resource group. You can be a reader of the assets. You can be a contributor to them. You can even create custom roles to do just one specific thing. So all of that is possible with the access control. You just look for these little people in the portal, in the Azure portal. You click on that, and you get into that space for doing access control. One thing that I find is very, very helpful is that you can also do tagging on resources. Remember I told you that you can split the bill? This helps you with your billing. Well, the prerequisite of that is to actually include tags in everything that you do. Okay? And tags are key value pairs that you can assign to any resource groups, and to any resource in Azure. You can specify the keys, department, avdelning, I don't care, use your own name. You can specify the values. So within your organization, if you have different, maybe we want to separate the production environment from the development environment in terms of how much each one of them costs. Maybe we have multiple departments. Maybe we have multiple services. By giving them tags, you can keep track of that. And then you can actually go and search only the resources tagged R&D. That's really cool and really helpful. And that actually shows up also on the bill at the end of the month. So you can give that to the bean counters, and they can go nuts with Excel and just divide things. Right? So you have to do that. But what if you forget to assign these things? Well, cool thing is that you can also use policies in Azure. And policies for Azure work in the following way. You can create a little policy, and again, it's JSON, right? With a little if-then statement. And you can assign that, you can apply that to either the whole subscription or to a resource group. Actually, you can provide them to supply them to resources as well, but I've rarely found a good use for that. But let's say you want to do something like this. You may only deploy in Western Europe or Northern Europe. If the location field of your deployment of the resource your deployment is not Western Europe or Northern Europe, then deny the deployment. So you can specify geo-fencing, basically saying that within our company, we deploy our resources to Europe, and that's it. And this is funny to apply this tags thing to your subscription. You can do that to your colleagues, and then they'll be crazy for a while trying to figure out why their deployments fail. Because actually in the Azure portal, if you go into the portal and create a resource, you can't create the tags when you create the resource. So if you apply this template to your subscription, nobody can create other than command line, right? But they should be doing it command line anyway. So there you go. There's also that's the evil manager version, right? But there's also the nice manager version, and I want to show that you can do, if there is a tag called cost center, that if the tag cost center doesn't exist, well then we can append the tag cost center with the value R&D. So if you have a subscription that the R&D department are using all the time, and if they're creating and deleting resources all day long, they're probably doing their job. They're R&Ding. That's what they should be doing. But they should also remember to tag everything, and they won't. So you can help them with that. So anyway, those are important things that you can do. To sort of summarize, to sort of round off here and have pizza in a few minutes, you want to do this to remove the human component here. You want to do auditing and control of your resources. I didn't even get into management. It's actually too much for just one presentation to get into management as well. There are several things you can do there as well. You can get spend control. That's the baseline of spend control, and that's important to most companies to really know, because I've gone into companies and they go like, oh, we've been using Azure for a few years and our Azure build just keeps growing and growing and growing, and they're out of control. They need to get back into shape, and the way to actually put your Azure bill on a diet is to start figuring out who owns what by tagging it. You can put a tag responsible person and then Bob, right? It's perfectly possible to tag stuff like that. And you can run automatically through all your resources and figure out if somebody deployed anything that isn't tagged. And then you can actually go and figure out who did that. And go and hit him over the head. Yes? Yes, of course. You can add and change tags anytime you want. You can add and change tags through the portal. Yes, you can. And so all of this stuff is very, very important. And the last one is super important. It's automation, automation, automation. And I don't know if you knew this, but you can't say that word just once. You have to always say it 3 times. Okay? So from now on, you always say automation, automation, automation. It's very important. Any additional questions before we round off? It's very clear, the thing that I just said. This is what you need to go and do now. You should definitely do it. There are so many gains there. Spend a few hours a day or something to actually try to invest to implement this within your company, and it'll benefit you forever. So it's really, really useful to do. So, again, there are some new challenges in the cloud. You should learn to manage the resources in a proper way, and the Azure Resource Manager in that context is super central. I believe that is a model that Microsoft will keep for a long time in Azure, because there's no point in changing something that really works well. So you should check that out. It's super important. You can also sign up for my workshop, where I will go into deep depth about this and help you all understand how to do this. It's a 2-day workshop. Reach out to me if you want to do that. And that was all I had to say. We'll end with a joke, of course. Maybe you can figure out who I am in that. One of the guys. Well, right? So that was it. And I guess now I'm the guy who has been standing between you and pizza, which is a dangerous place to be. Thank you for your time.